Always the bridesmaid, never the bride, but have we ever wondered what it would be like if the Decepticons were run by the faithful Lieutenant Soundwave? The Marvel comics like to portray him as a leader in the early stages and certainly could go toe to toe with the likes of Optimus Prime. He's always been there or thereabouts, he's always been high ranking. But what if Megatron didn't exist? What if Soundwave was the leader of the Decepticons? At least in the context of the Generation 1 cartoon going up to the 1986 movie, what would that look like? Would it be superior or inferior? Let's find out on the other side of the Matrix.
The other side of the Matrix.
Quickly then, looking at the backstory of Soundwave. He's always been Megatron's closest ally. He's never betrayed him, even if he's never fully agreed with Megatron's actions, motives, or desires. He's never been one to speak up against him. The loyalty is there absolute. But there has been instances of Soundwave taking charge and what it would look like under his rule, even as recent as Skybound, taking a bit of a coup, if you like, a control of the Decepticons by force. But there is evidence of what sort of leader he would look like. There isn't this egocentrical driven character that Starscream would be. There isn't this bloodthirsty world domination of Megatron. There is logic, not as cold logic as Shockwave. There is almost a sense of compassion. He believes purely in the Decepticon cause and what it initially stands for, and he's very loyal to that cause. But IDW and Skybound have shown the type of leader he can be. There is a sense of standing by your comrades, doing the right thing, compassion where it needs to be, but necessary evil where it needs to be as well. But let's go back to 1984. Let's go back to the crashed ships on Earth. Let's go back to the crashed Ark, the crashed Nemesis. And what would it look like if the first bot that woke up was really Skywarp, who would then revive Soundwave and not Megatron? Let's say Megatron was not there at all. What would that look like? But hold on, I hear you ask. What's he doing on the shuttle in the first place if Megatron's not the one giving the orders? Well, Cybertron is still in a poor state. The Autobots need to go off and find Energon. They still go to Earth. The Decepticons, in their kind of desperate state, follow them as well. They're trying to get one up on the Autobots, whether they destroy them or not. But also, they're Energon starved. They need resources. They're still better off following them. They can still board the shuttle. They can still have a fight. Now, when the Decepticons wake up, the same premise will happen. Soundwave will give the order to revive all the other Decepticons and to go away. Starscream will still try to blow up the mountain. Soundwave will say, "Don't waste your Energon, mate," and they will jog on. But where does it change going on from there? Let's say it's very early days. Soundwave will want to establish communications with Cybertron at the earliest opportunity, so this maybe brings forward the space bridge. Now, this is where I think you're going to get the first hurdle of Soundwave. With Megatron in charge, Shockwave wouldn't dare try and overthrow him, at least not in the guise of the cartoon. Soundwave in charge, I think Shockwave might look and say, "I might fancy challenging your authority," and now we could have a bit of a power struggle. You could have someone like Shockwave who has an ego of sorts, maybe not like Starscream, but would want to vie for control and do things his way, how he feels the Decepticons would be run. But Soundwave has a much more passive view of things and would still want to take Earth's resources, still try and go to the dam and try and get his Energon pizzas as much as he would. But fighting the Autobots is not Soundwave's preferred option. He is much more data driven to his task. Get the Energon, restore the comrades, restore their fallen heroes, then get back to Cybertron at the quickest opportunity to restore the advantage to the Decepticons. And over the way, things don't really change too much. The Autobots will still try and defend Earth. It's still going to be down to Soundwave and the Decepticons to steal Earth's resources and kill some humans on the way, so the Autobots are going to get involved. We could get into, does Soundwave create the Constructicons? Do they create Megatron? The Constructicons will probably still appear in one form or another. They will just report to Soundwave. And Starscream, we cannot forget about him. He's still going to get involved. Yep, if Shockwave is going to challenge Soundwave's authority, you can bet your bottom dollar that Starscream is as well. But how would that look? And this is where Skybound comes into it. Megatron's biggest flaw, as it's been said time and time again, he liked Starscream. He thought he was good to have around and was happy to admit that one day you will crush me and you will take over as leader of the Decepticons, but he was happy to keep him despite the numerous attempts to overthrow him. Soundwave would not be so inclined to do so. He would wait for 1 or 2 attempts and then he would just simply kill Starscream. He would send him off to his death. He would exile him. He would not keep him around. And the Seekers would have no choice but to fall in line behind Shockwave. That makes perfect sense. Again, there's much more of a do the necessary with Soundwave, where Megatron was much more happy to entertain the idiot. And Soundwave would not put up with that. So that could be Starscream out the picture very early on. Maybe that brings forward, much more forward, the episode of Bruticus and Starscream's Brigade. The timeline of events doesn't change all that much. You still need a space bridge, you still get the Cybertronium, you'll still have the Combiners, you'll still have Cosmic Rust, you'll still have all of these things. So it goes on, but the approach is different. You could argue Heavy Metal War does not take place, but I don't see Soundwave borrowing the powers of his other comrades. It doesn't seem to be his approach. There's almost a nobleness with Soundwave. If anything like IDW showed us, he's more likely to sue for peace, at least temporarily, with the Autobots. Looking at latter versions of Soundwave, it's never been his intention to wipe the Autobots out. They will stop them if they're in the way. They will fight for them. But there's not that kind of killer vibe, although his biopic and his toys screams of music to my ears. You looking at the comic iterations and even some form of the cartoons, there isn't that bloodthirsty nature that Megatron would have. So taking the powers of your comrades in Heavy Metal War to get one up over the Autobots, whilst he might want to do that to remove them as a distraction and carry on with the mission, Soundwave would not go out of his way to do so. He would be more about strengthening their numbers, getting in as many combiners and triple changers and whoever else to get the job done to get back to Cybertron and carry on with their overthrowing of the Autobots. This was the whole point of the Decepticons. It was an uprising, and this is at the very core of who Soundwave is. He is very much loyal to the Decepticon cause, not necessarily to world domination as it was portrayed. So all the timeline continues to exist. That's maybe with the exception of Heavy Metal War, but you still have the Cosmic Rust, you'll still have probably the Hate Plague, but we're getting further on ourselves, and probably Headmasters to come as well. How does it change in the 1986 movie? Well, things are probably still much the same. The Decepticons do have Cybertron, even though we don't entirely know how they got Cybertron, they've got Cybertron. And let's say that Soundwave is in charge of that and still wants to make the assault on Autobot City. But does he? Does he want to make the assault? This is where I think you could encounter another stumbling block. Let's say that there is kind of harmony in the Decepticons at the moment. Let's even say for the hell of it that Starscream's been welcomed back in. They've got Cybertron. The Autobots have effectively been exiled to Earth whilst the Autobots are doing quite happily there as they are, and they're living on Autobot City on Earth. They're on Cybertron. Soundwave is ruler and they've overthrown, they've won. You don't need to go anymore, and if you're looking at Soundwave, whose core belief is the Decepticon cause to overthrow the regime, you are being deceived. If they kick the Autobots away and it's only Decepticons left, is that the war done? Does the attack on Autobot City in 1986, does it never happen? And does it then leave the Autobots in scattered moons, more or less trying to assault to take their homeworld back? That's the only thing that's left with the fighting. The attack on Autobot City doesn't need to happen. The Decepticons have all of their resources, they have their planet back. They will probably still have the space bridge to transport whatever Earth resources, or you could argue you're not going to take Earth's resources because the Autobots are permanently stationed on Earth. So maybe it's a hollow victory. Maybe the Decepticons are back on Cybertron, but the galactic conquest of Earth and its rich resources to take Energon for has been a failure because the Autobots are stationed on Earth and therefore Earth's guardians. But it does make you wonder, why would you attack Autobot City if you got Soundwave in charge? There's not a pride to be won here. There's not a notch on your belt to win. Whether they do or do not is kind of irrelevant, because one thing that will happen is Unicron's going to appear and he's going to start eating planets. Now, how does this change? Unicron's going to go through and start eventually eating Cybertron's moons before making its way to Cybertron. If the Decepticons do not attack Autobot City, then Cybertron, Soundwave, the Decepticons, they're going to be first ones to be made aware that this big planet-eating monster is coming for them. What are they going to do? Well, they're going to attack it. They're going to try and meet it head on and sway it away, but they will soon realise they do nothing. And that's where another problem comes into it. One of two things could happen at this point. You would like to think they would quickly figure out that they cannot beat a planet-eating monster in one-on-one combat when they haven't really got anything to attack it with other than themselves and any cannons and turrets that Cybertron would have. But Cybertron could easily soon fall. The Decepticons, Soundwave and the rest of them could all just fall with Cybertron, be eaten and destroyed and then going into the smelting pit as we've seen. Or they could do a tactical retreat and they can abandon Cybertron completely, let it get eaten, and they would then get to Earth. There was no reason for the Autobots to leave Earth either, other than you could argue that Optimus and Ironhide and others will be stationed around on moons and satellites posts, but they don't need to go out into space. They were going to go looking for Bumblebee, Spike and the others. They could still stay on Autobot City. The Decepticons would be the first ones to do it. Could it then lead to the Decepticons fleeing to Earth under a banner of truce to say to the Autobots, we've got to fight Unicron together, we can't deal with this? And this is where you will get Soundwave, who's more inclined to do this than say Megatron would be. You can't really imagine Soundwave trying to negotiate with Unicron the same way Megatron was forced to negotiate in his weakened state. Even though it would be nice to think, what would Soundwave be updated to with Unicron's abilities if the positions were swapped? What would he turn into? You would say Sound Blaster, maybe, is the only thing he could really turn into. It's a nice thought, nevertheless. But given their traits and personalities, I can't see Soundwave leaving the Decepticons into a one-on-one conflict with Unicron that they would just not win. They would then look for the better solution, the more practical odds, the highest survival rate. And logic would dictate, cold logic, that would mean going back to Earth, going to Optimus, going to Ultra Magnus, going to Hot Rod and say, we need to work together here. As Transformers, as a whole, our very survival is at stake. How can we tackle Unicron directly? And you could argue that ends the war, a bit similar to the return of Optimus Prime, with Optimus and Galvatron shaking hands. There was something bigger than them that brought them together. Could the same be said with the Decepticons working with the Autobots to take on Unicron as Transformers, as a team? This isn't to say that there isn't a ruthless side to Soundwave. This isn't to say that there isn't enjoyment of fighting your opponent. But if you look at all the forms of Soundwave, he's never been so eager to destroy the opponents, to try and make them suffer. We see much more maliciousness from a Starscream, from a Shockwave, from Devastator, and of course Megatron. Soundwave is always the loyal lieutenant to follow orders. If he was the one in charge, I think the outcome would be slightly different. I think his approach would be different. His ethos and how he's going to be the Decepticons first, rather than galactic domination. But there we go, that's what if Soundwave was the Decepticon leader, at least in the guise of the Transformers cartoon from 1984 going into the 1986 movie. What do you guys think? What would you think would be the most probable outcome if Soundwave was leader, how the cartoon would kick off, and where would the Decepticons end up? Leave a note in the comments below, I'd love to know what you think. But thanks for watching, don't forget to like, share and hit that subscribe button because I will see you on the next one.